A little girl trapped inside her own body.
Every time she had a birthday, it was a countdown.
For more than 20 years.
Her body worked as long and as hard as it could until the very end.
Her priceless gift to science
is irreplaceable.
And the hospital's irreversible mistake.
They tossed out her brain. How can you do that with a brain?
This week on Open Record,
it was literally like losing Ashton all over again.
A neurological roadmap to the power of gene therapy.
The loss is tremendous.
Forever lost.
You can't put a price on it.
No, there's no price for that.
From the FOX6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Brian Polson, joined here by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
And we are joined once again by Contact 6's Jenna Sachs. Hi, Jenna.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Of course.
We are recording this episode on Wednesday, May 7th, and today just happens to be National Brain Donation Awareness Day, and it is, at least according to the Brain Donor Project, National Brain Awareness Day, which they say the day is meant to shine the light on the critical need for brain donations for neuroscience research. I promise you, this is purely coincidental because, we were scheduling this story to talk about today. We're going to be doing a story about a brain donation that actually went terribly wrong on this week's podcast, and it just happened to get scheduled for tonight on FOX6 News. A Milwaukee woman donated her brain for science, but a major Milwaukee hospital accidentally threw half of that in the garbage. Turns out it was the most important half, and we'll get into all of that right after this.
Welcome back to Open Record. This is a super unusual story, Brian, and it's one, unfortunately, with really terrible consequences that were super extreme. So can you walk us through what happened?
Yeah, this is one Jen and I were just talking before the podcast. I get the email about this. It came from a local attorney who I've worked with on stories before. And when you see in an email, hey, someone donated their brain and the hospital lost it. Are you interested? Yeah, I want to find out more. That's pretty unusual. In this case, it was a couple named Arlo and Scott Fellens. They raised a daughter in Menominee Falls with a rare genetic disorder called Canavan disease. It's a genetic disorder that causes white matter to degenerate in the brain and the spinal cord. Children lose the ability to talk. They can't use their arms and legs. They can't speak. You see in some of this video we have from when she was young, her eyes move. You can tell she's aware of what's going on around her. She smiles at times, but it's often referred to as a rag doll disease because these children who are diagnosed with it, they end up just essentially trapped inside their own bodies. What's interesting is this may sound somewhat familiar. We've done stories before on a disease called Krabbe disease.
I thought, as I was watching the story and reading it, it seemed similar to me.
It's similar in that there's this myelin coating around nerve fibers in the brain and spinal cord, and that myelin coating is a protective coating. It degenerates. It sort of kind of withers away, and that causes problems with the transmission of signals in the brain. I actually asked, is this sort of a related disease? And in a way it is. They're in a class of diseases called leukodystrophies. There are differences, though. Both, however, are fatal. And Canavan disease, I think Krabbe, especially the most serious form, it's often fatal by the age of 2.
Yeah.
Canavan by the age of 10. But if you're the parent of a new child, either one is an absolutely devastating, awful diagnosis. So we talked to Arlo and Scott about when they first heard this diagnosis, and you can imagine what a life-changing thing that is. By the time she was 3, actually a little before 3 years old, they had learned of an experimental surgery, a study that was taking place to inject healthy genes into the brains of children that have this defective gene. It's gene therapy. This is 20 years ago, and so this is really cutting-edge stuff at the time. And in fact, the way they went about this, and I don't understand all the intricacies. We'll actually have the doctor who did the surgery on later who can say more about this. But there was some sort of a viral vector. They inject a virus essentially into the brain to release the good gene, hoping that it will replicate and maybe fix the bad gene. It was never intended to be a complete cure, but it was, can we help improve the quality of life of these children? And in Ashton's case, it worked to a degree. It certainly worked in terms of the longevity of her life. She did not die by age 10. She died at the age of 24 just this past December. So she lived a much longer life, but of course, she still had severe limitations. you see in some of the video in the story we are going to be airing as we record this tonight on Fox 6 News, that she started to move her arms and her fingers just a little bit. But it's not like she ever gained the ability to walk or speak. She never spoke a word her entire life. So this was an experimental surgery that had some level of success, but it was certainly something that opened the door into the possibilities of gene therapy. And 20 years later, that has obviously come a long way.
So in your story, you actually sadly showed footage from her funeral, and it was said that her tissue was donated. That seemed like it was very important to the family, and that includes her brain?
Well, in fact, specifically her brain in this case. So the researcher who we're going to be talking with in just a little bit, Dr. Leone, is an Italian researcher at Rowan University in New Jersey. She had been staying in touch with all the kids. There were 16 children who went through this surgery. She'd stayed in touch with them throughout the years and had gotten to know Ashton and her family very well. And both Scott and Arlo Fellons and Dr. Leone said they had talked over the years about when Ashton dies, they'd like to donate her brain for further research. Dr. Leone will tell us more about why that was important to gene therapy, what she hoped to see from her brain. But they knew this was one way to sort of help their daughter live on, to give her a legacy that went beyond her 24 years. So they knew they were going to do it. And what's really interesting in this case, you say, well, there were 16 of these kids, so why is her brain so important compared to all of these others? Well, they actually had something rare, maybe unfortunate, but true, that they knew she was going to die in advance. She had gone on dialysis, and ultimately the hospital at one point told her she cannot come off of it. If she's going to leave the hospital, she's going to die. And they said, we don't want her to end her days in the hospital this way. So they made the decision to let her live her final days at home. But then when it got to the point she had to go in, they knew this was going to happen. So there was sort of and I don't know exactly the mechanism, if this was a sort of a deciding when to pull the plug kind of moment, but they knew what was coming and they were able to plan for it. And that meant they could plan for the removal of the brain, because when you remove a brain, it's not only an extremely intricate process, you got to do it quickly to preserve the tissue.
And how emotional for that family when they bring her in for that moment.
Absolutely, yeah. To say goodbye, to know that's what you're doing. And I know that Arlo talked about being in the hospital with her daughter, and I said, did she know? Did she know that her brain was being donated? She said, I told her, I talked to her about it. And so she knew what was coming, and she, in whatever way they were able to communicate, they said she wanted to do this. So obviously that's very meaningful for them, because they had to say goodbye, but now they feel like their daughter's still going to have this purpose. She could change the world. She could help others down the road. So they made this decision, and Dr. Leone actually draws up a protocol for what needs to happen. And it's Children's Wisconsin that is then going to do the removal. And they have a pathologist who does just that. She does the whole process, preserves the brain. And what they did is they separated the brain into hemispheres. So half of it was kept in a fixed solution. I think it's formalin. I don't know much about this, but I'm using words that have been told to me. So if I say it wrong, I'm not an expert here. But they put it in this room temperature solution, essentially. And then the other half is sliced and frozen. And that is the part that actually is preserved in a way that they could then later take some of those parts out, put them in a petri dish, grow them in a culture, and actually do things that could be much more useful. So I'm told that it's the frozen portion that was really the most valuable. But for a while, neither half was sent where it was supposed to go. It was supposed to go to this hospital, a children's hospital in Ohio, where they have a living biobank, and it just didn't show up. And so the doctor starts asking, well, okay, what happened? Where is it? And Ashton died in December, just before the holidays. It was like December 5th. So not just before, but you're heading into holiday season. Things are busy. It's not until January that the hospital finally responds and says, oh, sorry, the holidays, and we had some leadership transitions. Yep, we're going to get this thing sent off. It's already been a month, and it hasn't been sent. We're going to get it taken care of. There's somebody who's CC'd, hey, make sure this gets sent off properly. And then the weeks go by and the weeks go by and still nothing. And it wasn't until March that the doctor Dr. Leone comes back to the family and says, I don't know what to do. They're not responding to me anymore. So the family reaches out to Children's. And if you watch the story, you'll hear there's a phone call that comes from someone who I almost feel bad for the person who had to make the call, but from Grief Services at Children's. So when you get a call from Grief Services, it's probably not good news.
Right.
Probably, yeah.
And so Arlo got that phone call. They wanted to set up an in-person meeting to discuss what had happened. And she said, tell me right now. I know this is bad news.
Yeah.
Tell me now.
Don't draw it
So they
out.
ultimately arranged a call and told her that in fact, the frozen portion of the brain had been accidentally discarded.
Wow.
And that was, you could imagine
Yeah.
the digestion of that
Right.
moment.
Right.
What do you mean?
Right.
They threw it out. How could that happen? And that's what we talked to Arlo is she's just trying to figure out, so what do you mean? What happened? Who did it? How did it happen? And she says that they didn't offer any more detail.
Well,
they didn't really have any answers.
And like Scott, her dad was like, it was like losing her all over again. So, you go through that grief process and now you hear this news and you're like, oh gosh, it's like we're back at square one here with starting with the grief process.
Well, and you're thinking that, okay, it was hard to say goodbye, but we know she's going to live on in this way that could live on
The legacy.
forever.
Yeah.
That part now has been cut off. And so, yeah, that's a huge loss, an emotional loss for the family. But of course, they also want to know what happened.
Do we know?
Well, and we're getting more information finally as time comes out, but we still don't have vivid detail, like how it got thrown out. Was it mislabeled? And who was the person who did it? We don't know. We've talked to Children's Hospital. They declined to do an interview, but they did explain that these are the three things they said. Number one, at the outset, there was a consent that had expired. Remember, we said the family had wanted to do this for a long time. So they needed an updated consent. The brain was preserved. Within a day or two, they had the updated consent. In fact, that was all sent before the funeral. Dr. Leone set all that off. Then she went to speak at the funeral. And after that, they said there was the laboratory move. So they were moving a laboratory inside Children's maybe to a new location. And there are apparently protocols that are supposed to guide all of that, so where every piece of tissue is, and it's accounted for, and it gets moved properly. But even then, they didn't notice that this was gone. They also added that there were, quote unquote, various scheduling matters that delayed this. And I don't know what those various scheduling matters were. They wouldn't go into detail, but ultimately it's not until March that they go to ship the brain and they find out that the fixed portion is there. And that's when someone realizes, what about the
Where's
other
the rest
half?
of it?
And they did an internal investigation. We don't know the findings of that investigation other than they say it was accidentally discarded.
What does the family do now? Do they have any recourse for this?
Well, that's a really good question. And how I found out about the story was an email from an attorney.
Right.
And it's their attorney. They hired James Gendy with Gendy Law Office. And I've worked with James Gendy on stories over the years. He often will take on some pretty high profile cases. He has sued police departments and sheriff's departments, and he's a litigator. He's an aggressive litigator. So he's the one who reached out to me and said, I think this is a story you're going to want to tell. Why did they go to an attorney? Well, number one, they said it's not just the mistake, which Children's has said they feel terrible about. I think the words were, we're profoundly sorry for what happened. They're going over all of their protocols to ensure this doesn't happen again, but effectively no excuse. We messed up. So what do you do with that? Mm-hmm. What upset the felons the most beyond this obvious loss was that they feel it was kept from them for so long. Like you didn't know where it was. And so for months, you just stopped responding to try to cover your tracks. That's the way they view it. Now, Children says there were various scheduling matters, and it sounds like there was an internal investigation. We're not going to say a word until we know what actually happened. The reality is that the family feels like they kept this from them and kept them in the dark. And so they hired this attorney. Now, whether or not there is any cause of action here for donated tissue, that's what I don't know. And I guess that's what remains to be seen. Is there some sort of a negligence claim or something like that? I don't know. I do know that from talking to Attorney Gendy, he said they do plan on filing a lawsuit. There has not been one filed at this point, but that is kind of where things are as we speak.
Well, and the mom had also said in the story that you'll see tonight that, if part of the reason for donating the brain was to help her live on and, be aid in research for more about this disease. But potentially, if they do end up suing Children's Wisconsin, maybe they can do it in a monetary.
That was her
way, too.
view. She said maybe we collect some money and that can go toward research.
Right.
They're not looking to get rich off this by any means, but if they get the money, they said they'd like to put it toward cannabis research.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a little bit more about the implications for research, and we have a guest who's going to join us now, Dr. Leone. She's the one who did the original surgery. She's the researcher who wanted the brain secured, and she is going to be here with us on Open Record when we come right back. Welcome back to Open Record. We have a special guest with us today. It is Dr. Paula Leone, who is with Rowan University. She is the researcher who did the surgery, the gene therapy surgery on Ashton Fellons back in 2003. Welcome to Open Record, Dr. Leone.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here.
We've talked a lot about what happened here, but I want to talk about the impact on research. What was it that was so valuable about Ashton Fellons' brain?
Ashton was treated 3 years after she was diagnosed with Kahneman disease, and I was very close to the family since the beginning. That was in 2003, and there was the first application of adeno-associated viral vectors into the human brain for a neurologic condition. The program started in 2001, and Ashton was eligible at that time in 2003. So the very important, most valuable portion of it is that the vector and the healthy gene was introduced 21 years prior to Ashton passing. And that meant that her tissue had information that otherwise would take another 21 years to be revealed. The most important one that would affect the entire gene therapy field and advance and progress in introduction of genes into human tissue is that we could have quantified precisely the amount of transgene expressed in every single cell or tissue or area close, proximal, and distal to the site of the injection. We could have also identified the presence of the viral genome using specific sequences that are called ITRs. And so those are the two main issues that are lost. In addition to that, we could have really quantified homogenizing the tissue that was fresh. We could have quantified the content of the biomarker, which is really elevated in Kahneman disease due to the mutation associated with the aspartate gene. And so three main points were lost. The ability to detect the viral genome in specific areas of the brain, demonstrating whether that vector travel distally from the site of the injection and where it was located 21 years after the injection, the ability to determine the expression of the transgene, so the healthy gene that we introduce after 21 years, and also the inability to determine the quantity of a biomarker, that what we call the toxin that is elevated in Kahneman disease. This is all 21 years after the fact. The brain was particularly precious because was extracted freshly in the hospital. Usually this does not happen. Patient pass away at home, and so if there is any option or consent of the family for autopsy, this takes days. And so everything is decayed and is not really reliable. This was the most reliable specimen we could have hoped to have after 21 years. And this is information and details that could have just opened up new advances in gene therapy. And in addition to that is the fact that we have always said that Ashton was silent all her life, and this was going to be the way for her to scream out what happened to her during the past 21 years and how much the therapy helped.
I I know that Children's Hospital or Children's Wisconsin has reached out to me a couple of times. We have commercial promos running for our story, and they've reached out a couple of times to make sure that we are clear that half of the brain was sent. That was the fixed portion, and the frozen portion is the part that was discarded. They said it would be inaccurate to leave the impression that the whole brain was thrown away. But you have said it was the frozen portion that was the most important. Can you tell us why that is?
Because the frozen portion is still fresh and the enzyme are active, and the portion that is fixed is typically used for morphology analysis. So half of it is analyzed for activity and presence of the viral genome and expression and quantification of the biomarker after 21 years, while the fixed portion, which is in a fixative, can only be used for morphology studies. Any DNA studies will not be reliable unless they had the frozen part of it. So the result is that this is not publishable. We will never be able to tell the story. So with the frozen brain, everything is lost.
You know, Dr. Leone, Children's told Brian that there had been an issue with consent forms, then there was a lab move and scheduling issues. What are your thoughts on that explanation? And have you ever encountered something like this before?
No, I've not. Ashlyn's parents signed a consent many years ago during the study. And during the study, we had an institutional review board approval. So we had approved consent. So the immediate response was that that consent was invalid because the protocol was ended years earlier. And so they needed to have an active protocol. So I immediately called a colleague at Dayton Children's Hospital who runs the Living Biobank at Dayton Children, primarily for his patients. He cares for pediatric patients with cancer. And immediately we had the consent signed. And this all happened while I was trying to make it to Wisconsin to Ashlyn's funeral. So everything was released immediately. And we requested immediately that shipment. I provided FedEx detail. I provided everything they needed in order to ship the specimens immediately. And that happened around early December. I kept asking for the specimen because we wanted to analyze it as soon as possible, because we wanted to have it as soon as possible. I was at the point where I said, I'm going to go and take it myself when no one was replying to me. That was after January. And then there was a message stating that there was an administrative change that delayed the shipment, internal administrative change, and was only months after the fact, and only after the family was told that I was told that the move caused, in fact, the lab move caused that, unfortunately, the most important part of Ashlyn's brain was discarded by mistake.
Doctor, you know, we've heard that Children's is doing their own internal review and maybe some more information will come out from that. What do you hope comes from this whole situation?
My hope is that this is going to be a relief for the family that is really heartbroken twice for it. But really, primarily, I would like to overstate that every single institution should have a standard operating procedure for specimen and organs extract post-mortem to be listed, to have a database of it, and to be shipped immediately if this is the requirement. And so it seems that the standard operating procedure were not in place.
The guest who's waiting to join us after you is going to talk about, this is National Brain Donation Awareness Day. And I know I had trouble getting some people who want to talk about that because they don't want to be associated with what happened at Children's Hospital. They don't want people to lose trust in the tissue donation process. This is clearly a very unusual situation. You said you've never experienced it before. Do you worry at all that the takeaway from some might be, I'm not going to donate my tissue if they're going to handle it that way? What do you say to someone who looks at this and thinks, I just don't think I can trust them?
This is obviously the immediate reaction for what has happened, and that's why we should speak up about it, and we should make sure that standard operating procedures are in place when an organ is extracted, and there is absolute trust that the organ will be stored, delivered, and analyzed as it's supposed to be based on the consent of the patient or the guardian of the patient, as in this case.
Are there any other of the 16 children who went through your study who are still alive, who still might end up in this situation where you might be able to use what you would hope to use from Ashton, or was she kind of your last hope with that?
There are other patients that are still alive, and one of them, for instance, passed away. Unfortunately, the tissue was analyzed, but was not in good condition because went from home to a funeral home to the pathologist, and so days passed before the specimen was extracted. Could still be valuable, especially in the context of a perfectly preserved brain like the one that would have been for Ashton. And the problem with the other patients is that they're not in the United States, and it would be very hard to organize this type of extraction and then shipment of human organs from other countries to United States. So I don't want to say that is impossible, but I want to say that this was the last possible opportunity to do it as fast as possible, as quickly as possible, as best as possible in United States.
I'm certain your work still will go on in terms of looking for cures for Canavan disease. Is that are there still opportunities there? Is there still hope for the future for a cure?
We are actively working on a treatment, experimental treatment for Canavan disease, still targeting the brain, and the new protocol is conducted by Myrtle, is a biotechnology company, and the idea and the invention was really developed by myself, my group, my team, and it's very, very positive because from the first study that was done and conducted in patients like Ashton, we learned so much that we developed a new technique that targets the cells that primarily express the gene that is inactive, and that results in increased myelination and increased function, psychomotor function in patients treated with it. So there is a development, is ongoing. We're waiting that in fact the results of the first portion of the study will be published very soon in a high impact journal. So this is ongoing, and this is, I hope, is going to be approved by the FDA next year.
All right, Dr. Leone, thank you so much for being here on Open Record. We appreciate all of your time and access throughout this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to be joined by Dr. Jeffrey Nerschel with the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at the University of Wisconsin to talk about the importance of brain donation here on National Brain Donation Awareness Day. We'll do that right after this. Welcome back to Open Record. Our next guest is Dr. Jeffrey Nerschel, a neuropathologist and assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He specializes in Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body disease, and other neurodegenerative conditions, and he works with the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and the Wisconsin Brain Donor Program. Dr. Nerschel, thanks for being here on Open Record.
Thank you for having me.
So as we record on Wednesday, November 7th, it happens to be National Brain Donation Awareness Day, something I didn't know existed until I found out about this. Tell us why there is a day like this and talk about the importance of brain donation.
Yeah. So I think this is a newer awareness day, but we want to recognize the value of brain donation, the amazing gift that patients can do by giving their brain for medical research. It's really essential for the diagnosis of Alzheimer's and most neurodegenerative diseases. I work with adult patients and age-related neurodegeneration like Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia. As you know, the incidence is increasing and prevalence is increasing as the population ages. And what many people may not know is that the only way to definitively diagnose a neurodegenerative dementia is through brain autopsy. The clinical and imaging diagnosis can be wrong or at least only partially incorrect between 30 and 40% of the time. And the reason why brain donation is important and is such a gift for both the family and researchers is first, we provide a definitive and final diagnosis for the loved ones and their families. Diagnostic workup at no charge that gives the sort of final answer to what caused the dementia and what the implications may be, if any, for family. And then a single brain donation, whether healthy or due to dementia, can support hundreds of different studies. The types of studies we're doing are to better diagnose Alzheimer's using imaging and blood tests, which aren't currently available, but are in the research pipeline. We're trying to understand how Alzheimer's affects people differently, both different ethnic and population backgrounds, as well as access to health and other communities. I mentioned healthy and dementia because we also need healthy brain donors to understand what the difference between normal aging is between Alzheimer's. So a single brain, can power hundreds of studies all across the nation. We're part of a national Alzheimer's coordinating center. We are, very grateful to donors for their gift, and we have sort of very rigorous ethical privacy and database logging for managing and distributing the brain to researchers all across the country.
Dr. Nerschel, when I think of organ donation, I think of organs that are transplanted, right? I think of people donating their heart or their kidney or their liver. How often are people donating their brains?
Usually to donate a brain, you have to register with a research center, an Alzheimer's or other research institute. We're increasing awareness through days like this. Many people may not know it's possible. It's different from organ donation on your driver's license. Organ donation on your driver's license is just, can your heart, kidneys, or liver be used in another living patient? Whereas brain donation is, really to help the future generations through better understanding the disease and new knowledge.
So that's I was thinking I was going to ask I've got the brain donation thing on my driver's license.
Organ
donation. Or thank you for the correction.
Yeah.
Organ donation on my driver's license. That doesn't mean my brain will be donated. And I appreciate the distinction between donating for use in someone else versus donating for use in science. If someone is listening to this or they're watching this and they say, I want to help, what can they do? How do you donate your brain?
Yeah, I would recommend reaching out to a local research center in your state or county. There's a number of different Alzheimer's research centers as well as other brain banks. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We have a federally, nationally recognized Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And if you search Wisconsin Brain Donor Program, you'll find us, as well as more information about what brain donation is, how it can help future generations. A common misconception is that there are restrictions on the funeral after brain donation. That is not the case. I'm a pathologist. I perform the brain recovery. It's very respectful, prompt, surgical in a way. There's no visible signs. There's no restrictions on funeral arrangements, and you would never know whether a patient had a brain donation or not at the funeral.
So not to be crude, but you can still have an open casket.
Yeah.
You can't tell.
Right.
Exactly. Yep. There's no way to tell.
Well, and I think that could be a big factor for someone who says,
yeah.
"I want to help, but I'm sorry, this is my loved one. We want them to have an open casket funeral." So you're saying that wouldn't be an impact. You do these these extractions. I'm not sure what the term would be, but when these donations happen, what happens after you remove someone's brain? Where does it go?
We have standard operating procedures and secure facilities to perform the procedures in a hospital autopsy setting that's highly regulated. We take out the brain, perform a full initial diagnostic of the gross impression, how it just looks. We prepare the brain for freezing for fresh tissue, as well as fixed tissue for diagnostic and workup. I would say that both the frozen and fixed tissue can be used for research studies. The fixed tissue is a little more sort of long time archiving, and you can do a surprising number of studies from it. There are some studies that work best on frozen tissue, but with the technologies getting better, you can do a lot from both. We store them in secure freezers. They're logged in a secure database with barcodes, tracking, temperature management.
And then so you mentioned the biobank type of it. What happens is all of the tissue available to any researcher then, or how is it accessed? You said it could be used for potentially hundreds of studies. How does that work?
Yeah, so qualified researchers using approved methods and review boards, usually from other universities, request tissue. They go through a tissue review process reviewed by myself and others. We help researchers find the best tissue for their needs. Sort of me as the expert in the tissue diagnosis and pathology of Alzheimer's can direct them to the appropriate regions of the brain for certain diseases. And then upon review, we sort of create a request, log it, track it, distribute the tissue with a sort of, mutual handshake of, I've given the tissue to him, they've received it, confirmation, and then they perform their research study and acknowledge the, Wisconsin Alzheimer's Center for the contribution of cases.
I am in my mid-40s, and God willing, I will be around for a while longer. If I reach out now asking about donating my brain when I pass away, is there a consent that stays as long as I'm alive? Does that lapse? I know we talked a little bit about it in the story. Is it something I put in my will?
It might, it might depend on state or institutional policies. There are federal guidelines. There is the Uniform Anatomic Gift Act. That's a federal anatomic gift when you want to donate tissue for research. And many institutes use that or portions of that as part of their process for getting consent and permission to use the tissue. Patients to join Alzheimer's or other dementia studies usually join a little older, sometimes before they have symptoms, as sort of a normal control that, hopefully they'll progress and never have any dementia. But if they do, then that's an important control group because we can say they were normal up until this point. And that's a really important message to convey is that by the time someone has developed Alzheimer's to the point where it's severely affecting their life, there's actually a lot of changes that are already in the brain. And so one of the challenges if we want to develop new treatments for Alzheimer's is we need to catch it earlier. And in order to catch it earlier, we need imaging tests, we need blood tests. But importantly, the only way to definitively prove that a blood test or imaging test works is to get the brain autopsy and say, here is the pathology, it works.
Is it challenging to remove a brain? I mean, does it take a long time? Is it a short procedure? What goes into that without getting too technical?
It's a very respectful and prompt procedure, akin to any sort of surgery that would enter the cranium. And there's very minimal, sort of entry or scars. It's sort of just a small incision from the back. And then the skull, a portion of the skull is just gently lifted, the brain's removed, and then it's replaced and everything's sewn up. Very surgical. I'd say, not a terribly long procedure.
I want to wrap it up with this thought because there are people who are watching who may or may not be interested in this, but I want you to give me your best sell. Why is it? I mean, I think of how many of us know someone in our lives or someone who has dealt with dementia, and it is an awful thing. It is a terribly difficult thing, and there's so many people who want to see a cure for Alzheimer's and dementia. What's your biggest sell on saying this is why brain donation matters?
Well, it's a very, personal decision, but I would encourage anyone that's interested to strongly consider it, because it's the only definitive way to make progress against Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body disease, any form of neurodegenerative dementia. Because the brain, isn't, enclosed in the skull, there's very few ways that we can actually study it during life, and actually, see the cause of it, except under the microscope. And so it's the only way we can make progress against this. And we appreciate, everyone who's chosen to give to future generations.
Dr. Jeffrey Nerschel, University of Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Thank you for being here with us on Open Record.
Thank you very much.
And we will go off the record when we come right back. And it is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast, I can't even say podcast right now, where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question that Sarah has prepared for us. What's going to be this time?
Let me just say that last week's podcast, if you listened to it, because of course you did, we talked about
I have a friend.
the 100 men versus one gorilla.
Kale is on my side that 100 men.
The question still lives, so it's Kale loves that. Anyway, today I went in the newsroom and I said, "Hey guys, last week's question was a real hit on Off the Record. What can I ask this week? Because I didn't have one." And so one of our producers, Adrian, he goes, who also brought me the 100 men versus the gorilla. He goes, "Peanut butter, are you team creamy or team crunchy?" And I looked, and from an office,
can't be as controversial, can it?
No, there's really
apparently
there's
it stirred
clearly
up
just
some
one answer.
It stirred up some controversy. Okay.
When I was a kid, I loved crunchy, but
As a kid?
as a kid, I loved crunchy. Now it's always creamy.
See, I don't know a whole lot of kids that like crunchy.
No,
Okay.
creamy.
My daughter likes crunchy. I like I always like the crunchy.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you prefer crunchy?
No, I don't now. Now I prefer creamy. I don't know why. I mean, I like peanuts, but I just think creamy peanut butter is great.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. I mean, I like crunchy. My kids don't like crunchy. But it's something that's like a texture thing. I like the crunch in there because the bread's already soft.
Have you ever accidentally bought like the organic by mistake or the sugar-free? And
then
you have a
sugar-free is the
huge
worst.
container. Maybe it was
so
on
bad.
sale, so you got the jumbo size.
Yeah,
and you could
now
now
you
realize it's sugar-free.
Although
Now-
there's a difference between the
disappointing.
straight up sugar free and the natural, just
Yes.
pure.
Yeah.
We were doing
way different.
We were doing Whole30 for a while, where you can't have peanuts or peanut butter. So we had almond butter.
What a world.
Instead,
Is it not as satisfying?
Not good.
No.
It's not at all.
Have you ever had cashew butter?
Is it good?
It's really good,
Is it?
actually.
Okay, I like
Yes.
cashews, so I feel like I would like that.
I mean, I figure if it's I don't know if it's like Nutella, that's just sugar,
That's
right?
right,
Sugar and
sugar.
chocolate, right? So if
You
you, put
can't
enough
tell
sugar
me,
in
yeah.
something, it's going to be good. But
I don't think I could ever give up peanut butter. I mean,
No.
I eat it almost
either.
every day.
yeah, it's the peanut
It's a
butter
lot.
is pretty good. I mean, you got to have it for the PBJCs, right?
You do. You
Yeah.
absolutely have to have
Peanut
it for-
butter, jelly.
I still haven't
Cheese and
tried
cheese.
that and cheese. I
so good.
do need to try it. Okay, well, then which brings me to also the jelly. So how do you feel about jelly?
Grape.
Okay,
Grape.
Oh,
Grape. If it's
I like all of them.
Okay.
Strawberry. If I had to pick one
But
forever,
the seeds.
yeah,
like strawberry
doesn't
on
bother
toast
me.
is fine.
Well,
but
strawberry
Yeah.
jelly probably doesn't have seeds in it, does it? Jam.
Not really.
Jam
We get
like
jams.
preserves or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll get like the regular peanut butter, but I'll get like the healthy organic jelly. Because somehow I feel like that makes it better.
balances out.
No.
And then also, what about marmalade? Ugh.
I don't think
I don't know. That's not my favorite. But the only time I really have any
At
kind
a
of
restaurant.
jelly, typically.
Oh,
well, no. The
I thought you were gonna say like a diner.
No, the only time I really have a jelly is probably if it is it's grape jelly on a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I don't usually.
I think
Oh, okay.
have it
the
on
only
anything
thing
else.
I've used the marmalade for is an orange marmalade. And you can
Yeah, that's
put
the
it
only
as
one I
a,
can
in a
think of.
glaze.
Yeah, like a sauce
Yeah.
almost.
or like on a
you're-
cheese board or something.
You're probably doing that on like duck or something, right? Like there's an orange marmalade
Orange,
glaze
orange
on
and duck. Yes, absolutely.
Something I learned when we were doing the Whole30 because we could have like egg salad and it was like avocado oil mayo or something.
Right.
But you need you do need a crunch in
Yeah.
there. Egg salad is if you add. So I was chopping up bell peppers.
Egg salad. How long did you do that for?
Long enough.
That was a smelly long enough.
So much
Long
egg salad.
enough. I'm glad
okay,
that's
so
over.
you crunch it with the peppers?
Yeah, it
Okay.
just gives it a little
Yeah,
bit of
of course,
crunch.
yes.
And
I
that's
feel
what you're
like
saying with the crunchy peanut butter.
Yes, and that's why it's
I
like
think
either
that's
have-
fair.
I know you don't like pickles, but I'll do the
That'll
chocolate
be a nice
pickles.
crunch.
Also, celery's trash, but that does add a
Agreed.
little crunch.
We gotta wrap things up so that I can go get
All
some
right.
peanut butter.
All right.
We'll do that after this. And that is all the time we have on Open Record this week. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on the podcast or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. As always, thank you to Sarah. Thank you to Jenna. Thank you to Kale Zimney, who is behind the video switcher, and Dave Machuda, who will be putting this whole thing together and making us look better than we really are. With that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.